Down. 3, 2, 1.
All right. We should be up now. Welcome everybody tonight, Friday night here in the USA. This is Melissa from Catch the Buzz and Love Notes from God. And I'm joined tonight by my friend Christian Z. And he's
Hi,
hey.
everyone.
And I'm here in Idaho and he's in California. And tonight we're going to be sharing the book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, that was suggested to read by the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture from the 60s. His name was, he's a prophet of our church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the book is called None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And I know this chapter 3, this is about the money manipulators. And so, hold on. All right. In a world where nearly every decision seems tied to money, many people are questioning how financial pressures shape our most personal choices. From the rising cost of living to concerns about insurance and stability, it's becoming more common to hear people say that you must either be wealthy enough to afford everything or poor enough to qualify for assistance. Somewhere in the middle, many families feel stuck, wondering how they can provide, survive, and still build the future they hoped for. What does faith have to say about these worries? So tonight we're going to be talking about talking in this video, reflecting on the world focuses heavily on wealth, security, and security systems, and the scriptures remind us that God's care extends even to the smallest of his creatures. If he provides for a sparrow, what does that mean for us when we face fear about money, survival, and raising families? So thanks, Christian.
Yeah.
Anyways, I know we've both had pretty long days, and welcome to anybody who's here. Please let us know where you're from. And
Hey, everyone.
we're just going to go ahead and get started here. So we're on chapter 3. We're going to have 8 chapters in this book. Doing this every Friday until we're done. So we're going to try to do it about 8 o'clock, but 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So,
Yep.
All right. So we'll try to get to a point where we read like a page or close to a page, and then we'll stop and make some comments just to keep ourselves pacing well, because this is a very wordy book.
Yep.
They talked a little different back then in the 60s. So when this was written.
True.
All right. So many college history professors tell their charges that the books they will be using in the class are objective. But stop and ask yourself, is it possible to write a history book without a particular point of view? These are billions of events which take place in the world each day. To think of writing a complete history of a nation covering even a year is absolutely incredible. Not only is a historian's ability to write an objective history limited by the sheer volume of happenings, but by the fact that many of the most important happenings never appear in the papers or even in somebody's memoirs. The decisions reached by the big boys in the smoke filled rooms are not reported, even in the New York Times, which ostensibly reports all the news that it fit to print. All the news that fits is a more accurate description. In order to
Well,
build.
you're making me think of Mad Magazine, whose tagline was "All the news that fits, we print."
Yeah, that's an old magazine. Yeah. In order to build his case, a historian must select a minuscule number of facts from the limited number that are known. If he does not have a theory, how does he separate important facts from unimportant ones? As Professor Stuart Crane has pointed out, this is why every book proves the author's thesis. But no book is objective. No book can be objective, and this book is not objective. Liberal reviewers should have a ball quoting that out of context. The information in it is true, but the book is not objective. we have carefully selected the facts to prove our case. We believe that most other historians have focused on the landscape and ignored that which is most important: the cart, boy, and the donkey. And so that's was referring to in a previous video and chapter of what people see in the image that they are trying to portray to us. Most of the facts which we bring out are readily verifiable at any large library. But our contention is that we have arranged these facts in the order which most accurately reveals the true significance in history. These are the facts the establishment does not want you to know. Have you ever had the experience of walking into a mystery movie 2/3 of the way through? Confusing, wasn't it? All the evidence made it look as if the butler was the murderer. In the final scenes, you find out, surprisingly, that it was the man's wife all along. You have to stay and see the beginning of the film. Then, as all the pieces fall into place, the story makes sense. This situation is very similar to the one in which millions of Americans find themselves today. They are confused by current happenings in the nation. They have come in as the movie, so to speak, is going into its conclusion. The earlier portion of the mystery is needed to make the whole thing understandable. Actually, we are not really starting at the beginning, but we are going back far enough to give meaning to today's happenings. In order to understand the conspiracy, it is necessary to have some rudimentary knowledge of banking and particularly of international bankers. While it would be an oversimplification to ascribe the entire conspiracy to international bankers, they nevertheless have played a key role. Think of the conspiracy as a hand with one finger labeled international banking, others foundations, the anti-religion movement, Fabian socialism, and communism. But it was the international bankers to whom, let's see, but it was the international bankers to whom, lost myself. Okay, while it would be okay. All right, I'll start here. Think of the conspiracy as a hand with one finger labeled international banking, others foundations, the anti-religion movement, which that's important, the anti-religion movement, Fabian socialism, and communism. But it was the international bankers of whom Professor Quigley was speaking when we quoted him earlier as stating that their aim was nothing less than control of the world through finance. So do you have some thoughts? Oh, and hello, Lord of the Things. And yeah, do you have any thoughts there, Christian?
Well, you're making me think of the 3-word saying that we hear from time to time: follow the money.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite often a money motivation behind things, and this is going to get into how, secretive groups are controlling money in different ways that many people are not aware of, but it's still affecting them negatively.
Yeah, well, I know I used to enjoy watching, I don't know if it was Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, but it was something,
Oh yeah,
and you'd see like these really amazing houses, but then I was just like,
yeah,
as an adult, I was like, I can't watch this. I'm really sick over this actually, when you have so much like excess of wealth for like hundreds of dollars for a doorknob and $1,000 for a lamp or something, you
yeah,
know. Or
excess.
and that's modest, 1,000 sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's like, oh yeah, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also, I believe I saw in here.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, yeah,
so
not for yourself treasures on earth where moth or rust doth corrupt.
yeah, and so I just think like too often people kind of we get distracted, and of course that's what Satan would have us do, is to be distracted, and not realize how important having families is. So,
Well, and you brought up you were reading the interesting part earlier about the sparrow and God, if God takes care of even the sparrow, then how much more shall he take care of you? I'm paraphrasing the Sermon on the Mount, but it's a good
mhm.
point. We do have to have some awareness of our money. We can't, you can't like not think about it all at all, or you can't think that you can get by with zero, but there also has to be some component of trusting in the Lord that you'll be taken care of as you strive to do right.
Yeah,
But at the same time, we also have to be aware, it shouldn't become a matter of being okay with the secretive groups controlling things as they have been. We don't allow, we should not be knowingly allowing that to happen.
yeah. I'm trying to find them. Like, where was that scripture? Well, one of the scriptures that I had, because that's part of the big point of this is, what kind of faith are we having in God, in the things that the world that we live in. So Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21 is, let's see, is that the right one? Oh, yeah, 19 through 21. It
Oh, you
says,
found it.
yeah, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And then 31 through 36. Therefore take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink? Wherewith shall we be clothed? For after all these things the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knoweth that you have need of all these things. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. And this is the part that I forgot about in scripture until Jonathan Rumi in The Chosen, when he was doing on the Sermon on the Mount, said it, where it says, take therefore no thought for the morrow. For the morrow shall take no thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. But let's see, there's, I'm like, how was there, like, where is those other verses? But yeah, and
What part are you looking for?
somehow I'm missing the part where he provides for the sparrow, because it said through 36, but like maybe I don't know why
I know the Sermon on the Mount is in chapters 5, 6, and 7. I don't remember where the sparrow part is. It could be in 5 or 7.
Yeah, it was supposed to be here, but I don't know what happened.
But it could be in 6.
Yeah, it talks about, having faith that God will provide for you. He provides for the sparrow, and the sparrow seems to do nothing, but God provides for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see, where do governments get the enormous amounts of money they need? Most, of course, comes from taxation, but governments often spend more than they are willing to tax from their citizens, and so are forced to borrow. Our national debt is now $455 billion, every cent of it borrowed at an interest from somewhere. The public is led to believe that our government borrows from the people through savings bonds. Actually, only the smallest percentage of the national debt is held by individuals in this form. Most government bonds, except those owned by the government itself through its trust funds, are held by vast banking firms known as international banks. For centuries, there has been big money to be made by international bankers in the financing of governments and kings. Such operators are faced, however, with certain thorny problems. We know that smaller banking operations protect themselves by taking collateral, but what kind of collateral can you get from a government or a king? What if the banker comes to collect and the king says, off with his head? The process through which one collects a debt from a government or a monarch is not a subject taught in the business schools of our universities, and most of us, never having been in the business of financing kings, have not given the problem much thought. but there is a king financing business, and to those who can ensure collections, it is a lucrative indeed. Economics professor Stuart Crane notes that there are two means used to collateralize loans to government and kings. Whenever a business firm borrows big money, its creditor obtains a voice in management to protect his investment. Like a business, no government can borrow big money unless willing to surrender to the creditor some measure of sovereignty as collateral. Certainly, international bankers who have loaned hundreds of billions of dollars to governments around the world command considerable influence in the policies of such governments. And I think a lot of us don't really, because we're just not aware, don't think about how that's really like having investors in a business. Because you, as you know from being in business, it's like once you have investors involved, people say, oh, things aren't going to change. But when you have investors, they have a stake in things, and they want to say what they want different. And what do you think about that stuff, Christian?
Well, yeah, there's a whole bunch of, you got to watch the money. Yes, when investors get involved, things become different. They have questions. They want to know what's happening. You gotta watch it and be very vigilant, monitor things. It's making me think of the parable of the talents. You got to multiply the talents
Mm-hmm.
and keep going and make the shares worth something instead of hiding it. You don't just sit and not do anything like the guy that had the one talent.
Well, and that's as I know we say a lot of times, that like it takes money to make money. So there has to be a certain
Yeah,
amount of investing and a certain amount of risk to be able to,
correct.
get far, get ahead, as they say. But yeah, and so it's really different when you think about investing in other countries, and they always try to make things sound like they're concerned about having other countries involved in elections. But here they are making investments in other countries, right? Everything is
That
fine.
yeah, like I'm
It's
saying,
all
like I
fine.
said, entanglements and then it gets hard for anybody to track everything that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But a lot of this stuff, to kind of touch on what things you were talking about earlier when you were reading from the book, is the international bankers and stuff. They purposely try to make the money issue confusing
Mm-hmm.
so that the
Yep.
common people don't understand it, and the quote unquote common people just go, oh, they just kind of throw their hands up in the air and go, well, there's all this stuff going on we don't understand, that's how it is. But these people want it that way. So that, here we go again with a little bit of learning. Let's learn and chip away at things and keep the learning process going. And then that empowers people.
Yeah. And there comes that certain point where, they want, like you said, they want you to just like not be involved. And so that's part of the point of this too, is helping people to helping us all to have awareness of the things that are actually have been going on. So let's see. But the ultimate advantage the creditor has over the king of or president is that if the ruler gets out of line, the banker can finance his enemy or rival. Therefore, if you want to
That's an
stay,
important point.
mm-hmm. Yeah, control there. Yep. Therefore, if you want to stay in the lucrative king financing business, it is wise to have an enemy or rival waiting in the wings to unseat every king or president to whom you lend. If the king doesn't have an enemy, you must create one. Preeminent in playing this game was the famous house of Rothschild.
There you go.
Its founder,
Yeah.
Meyer Amschel Rothschild, 1743 to 1812, of Frankfurt, Germany, kept one of his 5 sons at home to run the Frankfurt Bank and sent the others to London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples. The Rothschild became incredibly wealthy during the 19th century by financing governments to fight each other, according to Professor Stuart Crane. So they had a little franchise in the family, having different people go out to keep things in control for themselves.
They're one of the big names that comes up there that have been kind of pulling strings behind the curtain for decades and centuries.
Yeah. If you will look back at every war in Europe during the 19th century, you will see that they always ended with the establishment of a balance of power. With every reshuffling, there was a balance of power and a new grouping around the House of Rothschild in England, France, or Austria. They grouped nations so that if any king got out of line, a war would break out, and the war would be decided by which way the financing went. Researching the debt positions of the warring nations will usually indicate who was to be punished. In describing the characteristics of the Rothschilds and other major international bankers, Dr. Quigley tells us that they remained different from ordinary bankers in several ways. They were cosmopolitan and international. They were close to government and were particularly concerned with government debts, including foreign government debts. These bankers came to be called international bankers. One major reason for the historical blackout on the role of the international bankers is political history is that the Rothschilds were Jewish. Anti Semites have played into the hands of the conspiracy by trying to portray the entire conspiracy as Jewish. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The traditionally Anglo Saxon JP Morgan and Rockefeller international banking institutions have played a key role in the conspiracy, but there is no denying the importance of the Rothschilds and their satellites. I'm like, satellites?
Mm-hmm.
However, it's just as unreasonable and immoral to blame all the Jews for the crimes of the Rothschilds as it is to hold all Baptists accountable for the crimes of the Rockefellers.
Yeah.
Well, those are those same smoke screens we've seen now during the hello person who came on. The cancel culture that happened, especially during 2020, it was just on fire. And I know that was like all over the world where, people would say, oh, well, you're a bigot, you're prejudiced, a lot of stuff that didn't even make sense at all,
Oh, it didn't make sense. And I remember just people that I knew just coming out of the blue telling me I was racist. I'm like, where are you even getting that from?
Yeah, right.
Well, they made the accusation, so I have to live with it now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had a friend too that her husband was Hispanic and stuff, and she's Caucasian white, and she was like,
Yep.
"I'm racist, okay." But the Jewish members of the conspiracy have used an organization called the Anti-Defamation League as an instrument to try to convince everyone that any mention of the Rothschilds or their allies is an attack on all Jews. In this way, they have stifled almost all honest scholarship on international bankers and made the subject taboo within universities. And I think that's one of the, that's the sad thing about when you take religion and you manipulate it to put up this smoke screen.
Oh, yeah. Kind of a shield.
Yeah, it's really sick and sad. And then of course they talked about how
it's manipulative.
well, in this it says actually nobody has a right to be angrier at the Rothschilds clique than their fellow Jews. The Warburgs, part of the Rothschild Empire, helped finance Adolf Hitler. There were few, if any, Rothschilds or Warburgs in the Nazi prison camps. They sat out the war in luxurious hotels in Paris or immigrated to the United States from England. As a group, Jews have suffered most at the hands of these power seekers. A Rothschild has much more in common with a Rockefeller than he does with a Taylor from Budapest or the Bronx. And the scripture I thought of too with this was Moses 7:33, where it talks about how they hate their own blood.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what I think of when I think about let's see. It says, "And unto thy brethren have I said, and also given commandment, they should love one another, and that they should choose me, God, their Father. But behold, they are without affection, and they hate their own blood." And to me, that's one of the saddest things, when you can get into money and power so deeply that your people of your own blood, even, you would have no love and care for, you know,
Yep.
your own people.
Precisely. Precisely.
Yeah. It's something that I was not aware of. I'd heard of the Rothschild before, in kind of passing of different, these kinds of conspiracy things, but I wasn't not aware they were Jewish.
Yeah, and I've heard that there's even more going on behind them.
Yeah. There's layers.
Yep, there's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Since the keystone of the international banking empires has been government bonds, it has been in the interest of these international bankers to encourage government debt. The higher the debt, the more the interest. And I thought it was interesting. I found out in some countries they do not allow you to get into debt. So if you have a sports car, it's because you can afford to pay for it, which is
Okay.
interesting. It would make sense if you're really trying to kind of take care of people, to not let them get out of control, I guess, by not letting them get out of control and not let them having that kind of money lent to them. So
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, but if that's going on, then there would have to be other things going on to help facilitate that, so it's not extraordinarily difficult to pull off, such as like inflation. If inflation's out of control, nobody is going to be able to ever get a sports car. As
yeah,
like an example to throw out. But if they have the whole money system operating properly, then okay, I could see that.
yeah. Let's see. All right, so nothing drives government deeply into debt like a war, and it has not been an uncommon practice among international bankers to finance both sides of the bloodiest military conflicts. For example, during our Civil War, the North was financed by the Rothschilds through their American agent, August Belmont, and the American South through the Erlangers, Rothschild relatives. But while wars and revolutions have been useful to international bankers in gaining or increasing control over governments, the key to such control has always been control of money. You can control a government if you have it in your debt. A creditor is in a position to demand the privileges of monopoly from the sovereign. Money-seeking governments have granted monopolies in state banking, natural resources, oil concessions, and transportation. However, the monopoly which the international financiers most covet is control over a nation's money. Well, and that's one of the things too, is I know, like I was reading at the beginning, it people will sit there and say, "Oh, well, nobody wants to have children," but they don't take the time to find out why. They just sit there and think, "Oh, they're lazy, or they just don't care." And I've had coworkers say, "How can I can hardly afford to take care of myself. How can I even plan on having children and caring for them?" So, which family is central to the creator's plan. So, of course, the
Yep.
adversary would be after that and do whatever he can to stop it. People having
Yep.
children and having families. And what they say, a man without a country. One of the most dangerous things is a man without a country. And to me, that's kind of like having a family, having somebody you look out for and belong to, and you are have a responsibility for.
When you're not tethered to anything, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. But I also like to think of our current president as being somewhat that, which is why he's so dangerous to them, because he has a lot of money on his own, that everybody can see, and a lot of people can see, and so there's that threat of somebody that you can't control so much.
Yep. Exactly.
So, all right. Eventually, these international bankers actually owned, as private corporations, the central banks of the various European nations. The Bank of England, Bank of France, Bank of Germany were not owned by their respective governments, as almost everyone imagines, but were privately owned monopolies granted by the heads of state, usually in return for loans. Under this system, observed Reginald McKenna, president of the Midlands Bank of England, those that create and issue the money and credit direct the policies of government and hold in their hands the destiny of the people. Once the government is in debt to the bankers, it is at their mercy. A frightening example was cited by the London Financial Times of September 26, 1921, which revealed that even at that time, half a dozen men at the top of the big five banks could upset the whole fabric of government finance by refraining from renewing treasury bills. All those who have sought dictatorial control over modern nations have understood the necessity of a central bank. When the League of Just Men hired a hack revolutionary named Karl Marx to write a blueprint for conquest called the Communist Manifesto, the fifth plank read centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. Lenin later said that the establishment of a central bank was 90% of communizing a country. Such conspirators knew that you cannot take control of a nation which you cannot control its economy. The anarchist Bakunin sarcastically remarked about the followers of Karl Marx. They have one foot in the bank and one foot in the socialist movement. Well, and as we talked about too, when people are concerned about how they're going to be able to afford a home or anything else, the interest and credit, the interest rates for like home loans and everything, they really block a lot of people from having the opportunity to move at all because the rates
Oh
are so
yeah.
bad and their prices too
Unfortunately.
high. Yeah. That affects people taking certain jobs, people moving around.
Well, then what the secret groups want to do is own all the homes so they can rent them out to people to live there.
Yeah, control that too, right? Yeah. Control every level. The international financiers set up their own front man in charge of each of Europe's central banks, Professor Quigley reports. It must not be felt that these heads of the world's chief central banks were themselves substantive powers in world finance. They were not. Rather, they were the technicians and agents of the dominant investment bankers of their own countries, who had raised them up and were perfectly capable of throwing them down. The substantive financial powers of the world were in the hands of these investment bankers, also called international or merchant bankers, who remained largely behind the scenes in their own unincorporated private banks. These formed a system of international cooperation and national dominance, which was more private, more powerful, and more secret than that of their agents in the central banks. Dr. Quigley also reveals that the international bankers who owned and controlled the banks of England and France maintained their power even after those banks were theoretically socialized. Naturally, those who controlled the central banks of Europe were eager from the start to fasten a similar establishment on the United States. From the earliest days, the founding fathers had been conscious of attempts to control America through money manipulation, and they carried a running battle with the international bankers. Those Thomas Jefferson wrote to John Adams, "I sincerely believe with you that bank establishments are more dangerous than standing armies." Well, and that's what is unique about our country or on our money. It says, "In God we trust."
Mhm.
So, but even though America did not have a central bank after President Jackson abolished it in 1836, the European financiers and their American agents managed to obtain a great deal of control over our monetary system. Gustavus Myers, in his History of the Great American Fortunes, reveals, under the surface, the Rothschilds long had a powerful influence in dictating American financial laws. The law records show that they were powers in the Old Bank of the United States, abolished by Andrew Jackson. During the 19th century, the leading financiers of the metropolitan East often cut one another's financial throats. But as their Western and rural victims started to organize politically, the robber barons saw that they had a community of interest toward which they must work together to protect themselves from thousands of irate farmers and up and coming competitors. This diffusion of economic power was one of the main factors stimulating the demands for a central bank by would be business and financial monopolists. In Years of Plunder, Proctor Hansel writes of this era. Among the Morgans, Kuhn, Loebs, and other similar pillars of the industrial order, there was less disposition to become involved in disagreements that led to financial dislocation. A community of interest came into being with results that were highly beneficial. But aside from the major Eastern centers, most American bankers and their customers still distrusted the whole concept. In order to show the hinterlands that they were going to need a central banking system, the international bankers created a series of panics as a demonstration of their power, a warning of what would happen unless the rest of the bankers got into line. The man in charge of conducting these lessons was J. Pierpont Morgan, American born but educated in England and Germany. Morgan is referred to by many, including Congressman Louis McFadden, a banker who, for 10 years, headed the House Banking and Currency Committee as the top American agent of the English Rothschild. By the turn of the century, J.P. Morgan, that's who that was already an old hand at creating artificial panics. Such as affairs were well coordinated. Senator Robert Owen, a co-author of the Federal Reserve Act, who later deeply regretted his role, testified before a congressional committee that the bank he owned received from the National Bankers Association what came to be known as the Panic Circular of 1893. It stated you will at once retire 1/3 of your circulation and call in 1/2 of your loans. And talking about like a fake panic, that reminded me of during the pandemic when they all of a sudden everybody needed toilet paper and hand sanitizer because that's
Mhm.
necessary for
Yep.
life. And I was like, this was an experiment,
Yep.
you know. So
I remember. Yep.
and then of course what happened with the masks and everything. You need a mask, you don't need a mask. This, this is how many masks you need. This is what kind of mask you need. This is what's good enough. That's not good enough.
Well, they had the retail stores that would put arrow stickers down on the floor to say you can only go down this aisle in this direction.
Oh, right. Yeah. And of course, the social distancing.
Yep.
And I'm like, whoever was selling, what was it? That plastic glass, plexiglass. Whoever was selling
Yeah.
plexiglass was making some big time money at that time too.
Yeah, those were being installed all over.
Yeah. Let's see. Historian Frederick Lewis Allen tells in Life magazine of April 25th, 1949, of Morgan's role in spreading rumors about the insolvency of the Knickerbocker Bank and the Trust Company of America, which rumors triggered the 1907 panic. In answer to the question, did Morgan precipitate the panic? Allen reports. Oakley Thorne, the president of that particular trust company, testified later before a congressional committee that his bank had been subjected to only moderate withdrawals, that he had not applied for help, and that it was the Morgan's sore point statement alone that had caused the run on his bank. From his testimony, plus the disciplinary measures taken by the clearinghouse agents, the Hines, Morris, and Thomas Banks, plus other fragments of supposedly pertinent evidence, certain chroniclers have arrived at the ingenious conclusion that the Morgan interests took advantage of the unsettled conditions during the autumn of 1907 to precipitate the panic, guiding in shrewdly as it progressed so that it would kill off rival banks and consolidate the preeminence of the banks within the Morgan orbit. The panic which Morgan had created, he proceeded to end most single handedly. He had made his point, Frederick Allen explains. The lesson of the panic of 1907 was clear, though not for some 6 years was it destined to be embodied in legislation. The United States gravely needed a central banking system. Well, and the interesting thing is too is our biggest thing, of course, our life experience was the pandemic, and how we had some businesses that were able to operate while others couldn't, and some were making just a killing while the others were folding and suffering, and
Yeah.
nothing
Yeah, like
suspicious,
churches couldn't be open, but liquor stores could.
right? Yep, but those that have addictions need Jesus the most, right?
Yeah.
Of every kind of addiction, but yeah. Let's
Yep.
see. The man who was to play the most significant part in providing America with that central bank was Paul Warburg, who, along with his brother Felix, had immigrated to the United States from Germany in 1902. They left brother Max, later a major financier of the Russian Revolution, at home in Frankfurt to run the family bank. Paul Warburg married Nina Loeb, daughter of Solomon Loeb of Kuhn, Loeb and Company, America's most powerful international banking firm. Brother Felix married Frieda Schiff, daughter of Jacob Schiff, the ruling power behind Kuhn, Loeb. Stephen Birmingham writes in his authoritative Our Crowd, in the 18th century, the Schiffs and Rothschilds shared a double house. In Frankfurt, Schiff reportedly bought his partnership in Kuhn Loeb with Rothschild money. Both Paul and Felix Warburg became partners in Kuhn Loeb and Company. In 1907, the year of the Morgan precipitated panic, Paul Warburg began spending almost all his time writing and lecturing on the need for bank reform. Kuhn, Loeb and Company was sufficiently public spirited about the matter to keep him on salary at 500,000 per year, which that was a lot more back then even. So
Oh wow. Oh
while the
yeah.
while for the next 6 years he donated his time to the public good. Everything's fine. Nothing suspicious here. Working with Warburg in promoting this banking reform was Nelson Aldrich, known as Morgan's floor banker or broker in the Senate. Aldrich's daughter, Abby married John D. Rockefeller Jr., the current governor of New York, is named for his maternal grandfather. Well, and one of the things that you notice when you see how there's these families that have had all this money, and you think about yourself and how hard you work, and others that you know now how hard they work. I sat there and I was like, how is it these people, they always have so much money? Because stuff happens and people lose things. But I, realize for myself that they have these monopolies going, where this becomes this continuous cash flow of, you cause a problem to happen and then you help people get out of it. You just happen to have the fix for the problem because you
You
caused it in the
create the
first place.
problem and then you provide the solution.
Exactly. Yep. So yeah, I know some people are like, how do they sleep at night? Well, apparently on a big pile of money, but I still can't think that could be that comfortable.
Yeah, well, and then you were reading about these different marriages going on between these different banking families, and I'm like, it's not just like kingdoms, like France and Spain and all that, but like it's going on between banking dynasties.
Yeah, it's quite something how they put these systems together to keep themselves in power and to keep uh, friends, keep their friends around and enemies closer.
Hmm.
Let's see. After the Panic of 1907, Aldrich was appointed by the Senate to head the National Monetary Commission, although he had no technical knowledge of banking. We heard of a president's son that had those same situations, Joe Biden and his son.
Yeah, Hunter.
Yep. They had no experience, but he was the man for the job to make obscene amounts of money.
Hmm.
Uh,
And sell his paintings.
yeah, and $300,000 of the taxpayers' money being wined and dined by the owners of Europe's central banks as they toured the continent studying central banking. When the commission returned from its luxurious junket, it held no meetings and made no report for nearly 2 years. But Senator Aldrich was busy arranging things. Together with Paul Warburg and other international bankers, he staged one of the most important secret meetings in the history of the United States. Rockefeller agent Frank Vanderlip admitted many years later in his memoirs, despite my views about the value to society of greater publicity for the affairs of corporations, there was an occasion near the close of 1910 when I was as secretive, indeed as furtive as any conspirator. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the
There we
occasion of
go.
the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. Yeah, so now we're going to talk about Jekyll Island here for a bit. And then after I finish, like, there's a few paragraphs. Once I get through that, like, we'll try and have you make comments as you want to. Because didn't you say you had read Jekyll Island before or something, a book?
Yeah, the creature from Jekyll Island, and where I was sitting before when we covered chapter one, I was able to grab the book and hold it up to the camera briefly. But I think it's a good time for people to learn about it. And I had it recommended to me by somebody, and I didn't read it right away. I just thought, oh, what an odd sounding title. And finally, I don't know, a year or two later, I got it. I think Jeanette gifted it to me because I had mentioned it, and she's like, "Well, you keep talking about this book. Here, I'm going to get you a copy." And then I
Good.
started reading it. Went through all the audio of it and the library app, and I'm thinking this is super important for people to know about, for Americans to know about, to know what happened. These people sort of seize control invisibly,
Mm-hmm.
and we can kind of just go along and not, really aware of it and just be like, oh, this is how things normally are. Well, not really.
Yeah. So it says the secrecy was well warranted. At stake was control over the entire economy. Senator Aldrich had issued confidential invitations to Henry P. Davison of J.P. Morgan and Company, Frank A. Vanderlip, president of the Rockefeller-owned National City Bank, Paya Andrew, assistant secretary of the Treasury, Benjamin Strong of Morgan's Bankers Trust Company, and Paul Warburg. They were all to accompany him to Jekyll Island, Georgia, to write the final recommendations of the National Monetary Commission report. At Jekyll Island, writers B.C. Forbes, in his Men Who Are Making America, said, after a general discussion, it was decided to draw up certain broad principles on which all could agree. Every member of the group voted for a central bank as being the ideal cornerstone for any banking system. Warburg stressed that the name central bank must be avoided at all costs. It was decided to promote the scheme as a regional reserve system with 4, later 12 branches in different sections of the country. The conspirators knew that the New York Bank would dominate the rest, which would be marble white elephants to receive the public. Out of the Jekyll Island meeting came the completion of the Monetary Commission report and the Aldrich Bill. Warburg had proposed the bill be designated the Federal Reserve System, but Aldrich insisted his own name was already associated in the public's mind with banking reform and that it would arouse suspicion if a bill were introduced which did not bear his name. However, Aldrich's name attached to the bill proved to be the kiss of death, since any law bearing his name was so obviously a project of the international bankers. I know the first time I was hearing about the Federal Reserve, I was like, oh, federal, it must be government, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They purposely named it that just for that reason, so people would be like, oh, okay, it's this federal government thing that's around. Don't question it.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, let's see.
And the name is so boring. You just kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, that's one of these things that goes on.
Yeah, not exactly exciting like Jekyll Island.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jekyll Island and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah. When the Aldrich bill could not be pushed through Congress, a new strategy had to be devised. The Republican Party was too closely connected with the Wall Street. The only hope for a central bank was to disguise it and have it put through by the Democrats as a measure to strip Wall Street of its power. The opportunity to do this came with the approach of the 1912 presidential election. Republican President William Howard Taft, who had turned against the Aldrich bill, seemed a surefire bet for re-election until Taft's predecessor, fellow Republican Teddy Roosevelt, agreed to run on the ticket of the Progressive Party. In America's 60 Families, Ferdinand Lundberg acknowledged, as soon as Roosevelt signified that he would again challenge Taft, the present defeat was inevitable. Throughout the three-cornered fight, Taft, Roosevelt, Wilson, Roosevelt had Morgan agents Frank, Munsey, and George Perkins constantly at his heels, supplying money, going over his speeches, bringing people from Wall Street into help, and in general carrying the entire burden of the campaign against Taft. Perkins and J.P. Morgan and Company were the substance of the Progressive Party. Everything else was trimming. In short, most of Roosevelt's campaign fund was supplied by the two Morgan hatchet men who were seeking Taft's scalp. The Democrat candidate, Woodrow Wilson, was equally the property of Morgan. Dr. Gabriel Kolko, in his The Triumph of Conservatism, reports in the late 1907, he, Wilson, supported the Aldrich Bill on banking and was full of praise for Morgan's role in American society. According to Lundberg, for nearly 20 years before his nomination, Woodrow Wilson had moved in the shadow of Wall Street. Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt proceeded to whistle stop the country, trying to outdo each other in florid and hypocritical denunciations of the Wall Street Money Trust, the same group of insiders which was financing the campaigns of both. Dr. Kolko goes on to tell us that at the beginning of 1912, banking reform seemed a dead issue. The banking reform movement had neatly isolated itself. Wilson resurrected the issue and promised the country a money system free from domination by the international bankers of Wall Street. Moreover, the Democrat platform expressly stated, "We are opposed to the Aldrich plan for a central bank." But the big boys knew who they had bought. Among the international financiers who contributed heavily to the Wilson campaign, in addition to those already named, were Jacob Schiff, Bernard Baruch, Henry Morgenthau, Thomas Fortune Ryan, and New York Times publisher Adolph Oakes. The insider sheepdog who controlled Wilson and guided the program through Congress was the mysterious Colonel Edward Mandell House, the British educated son of Representative of England's.
I was wondering if you're going to
Yeah.
mention him. I thought she's coming up on Edward House here. Go on.
Yeah. England's financial.
He was kind of a shadow president for a few years.
Yeah, that's where we're getting. We're getting there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Financial interest in the American South. The title was honorary. House never served in the military. He was strictly a behind the scenes wire puller and is regarded by many historians as the real president of the United States during the Wilson years. Yep.
There we go. Right there.
House authored a book, The Philip Drew Administrator, in which he wrote of establishing socialism as dreamed by Karl Marx as steps towards his goal. House, both in his book and in real life, called for passage of a graduated income tax and a central bank providing a flexible, inflatable paper currency. The graduated income tax and central bank are two of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. Well, I think as you were talking about too, with them saying that he was like the real president, presidents have to get elected, when they're the obvious one that's in the office. But if you're the person behind, you just keep going along to the next person and you arrange things.
Yeah.
They talk about.
And that's the secret part, the secret combination part, like where how come the people don't know about this? How come somebody who was unelected is, calling the shots?
Well, and that's the interesting thing is too, is when you pay attention to things that they're saying, and then all of a sudden their opinion, their opinion changes. And there's some that are just, they're suspicious of nothing. And I'm like I said, for example, the masks. Oh, you shouldn't, you don't need to wear a mask. That's crazy. And it's like, oh, wear a mask, wear 2 masks. And it was like, oh, you don't need to get the jab, and oh, it's experimental and everything. Then it's like, oh yeah, get the jab, get it again and get it again, and it just baffles me. We all have blind spots, but some of our blind spots are bigger than others.
Yeah.
So,
hey, could I ask how much is left in this chapter?
There's just a couple more pages because this other one has a chart that's mostly the whole back page. So it's like, nope, it's more like 6 pages. So,
okay.
By now,
I should wrap up. Yeah, I should wrap up here. I don't have to get off right this moment, but in a few minutes.
Okay. Well, I know I especially wanted to get to the part where we talked about Jekyll Island because I know that's something that you had mentioned before. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we'll finish these couple of pages, and then I'll just continue on myself.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay. In this, the intimate papers of Colonel House, Professor Charles Seymour refers to the colonel as the unseen guardian angel of the Federal Reserve Act. Seymour's work contains numerous documents and records showing constant contact between House and Paul Warburg. While the Federal Reserve Act was being prepared and steered through Congress, biographer George Varick assures us that the Schiffs, the Warburgs, the Kahns, the Rockefellers, and the Morgans put their faith in House. Their faith was amply rewarded. In order to support the fiction that the Federal Reserve Act was a people's bill, the insider financiers put up a smokescreen of opposition to it. It was strictly a case of Briar Rabbit begging not to be thrown into the briar patch. Both Aldrich and Vanderlip denounced what in actuality was their own bill. Nearly 25 years later, Frank Vanderlip admitted, now, although the Aldrich Federal Reserve Plan was defeated when it bore the name Aldrich, nevertheless, its essential points were all contained in the plan that finally was adopted. Taking advantage of Congress' desires to adjourn for Christmas, the Federal Reserve Act was passed on December 22, 1913, by a vote of 298 to 60 in the House, and in the Senate by a majority of 43 to 25. Wilson had fulfilled to the insiders the pledge he had made in order to become president. Warburg told House, well, it hasn't got quite everything we want, but the lack can be adjusted later by administrative process. Nothing suspicious there.
Yep. Yep.
There was genuine opposition to the act, but it could not match the power of the bill's advocates. Conservative Henry Cabot Lodge Sr. proclaimed, with great foresight, the bill as it stands seems to me to open the way to a vast inflation of currency. I do not like to think that any law can be passed which will make it possible to submerge the gold standard in a flood of irredeemable paper currency. After the
Point.
vote, Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh, Sr., father of the famous aviator, told Congress, this act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government, by the money power, proven to exist by the money
There we
trust,
go.
investigation will be legalized. This is the
Mm.
Aldrich Bill in disguise. The new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation. The Federal Reserve Act was and still is hailed as a victory of a democracy over the money trust. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The whole central bank concept was engineered by the very group it was supposed to strip of power. The myth that the money trust had been defrocked should have been exploded when Paul Warburg was appointed to the first Federal Reserve Board, a board which was hand-picked by the Colonial House. Paul Warburg relinquished his $500,000 a year job as a Quan Loeb partner to take a $12,000 a year job with the Federal Reserve. Nothing suspicious there.
Correct.
With the Federal Reserve, the accidentalists who teach in our universities would have you believe that he did it because he was a public spirited citizen, and the man who served as chairman of the New York Federal Reserve Bank during its early critical years was the same Benjamin Strong of the Morgan interests who accompanied Warburg, Davison Strong of the Vanderlip to Jekyll Island, Georgia, to draft the Aldrich Bill. How powerful is our central bank? The Federal Reserve controls our money supply and interest rates and thereby manipulates the entire economy, creating inflation or deflation, recession or boom, and sending the stock market up or down at whim. The Federal Reserve is so powerful that Congressman Wright Patman, chairman of the House Banking Committee, maintains in the United States today we have in effect two governments. We have the duly constituted government, then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve System, operating the money powers which are reserved to Congress by the Constitution. Neither presidents, congressmen, nor secretaries of the Treasury direct the Federal Reserve. In the matters of money, the Federal Reserve directs them. The uncontrolled power of the Fed was admitted by Secretary of the Treasury David M. Kennedy in an interview in May of 1969. Do you approve of the latest credit tightening moves? He says it's
I
not.
think that might be the same David Matthew Kennedy that helped the church with some stuff.
Oh, he says it's not my job to approve or disapprove. It is the action of the Federal Reserve. So we'll get through this last part of the page because it's quite interesting,
Okay.
and then I'll just finish up myself probably. Professor
Okay.
Carol Quigley of Harvard, Princeton, and Georgetown Universities wrote a book disclosing an international banker's plan to control the world from behind the political and financial scenes. Quigley revealed plans of billionaires to establish dictatorship of the super rich disguised as workers' democracies. World Economic Forum, right?
There you go. There you go.
All those philanthropists that are so caring.
Uh,
Sweet dreams if you afterwards if you listen to what they say. JP Morgan created artificial panic used as excuse to pass Federal Reserve Act. Morgan was instrumental in pushing US into World War I to protect his loans to British government. He financed socialist groups to create an all-powerful centralized government which international bankers would control at the apex from behind the scenes. After his death, his partners helped finance the Bolshevik revolution in Russia. And curiously enough, the Federal Reserve System has never been audited and has firmly resisted all attempts by House Banking Committee Chairman Wright Patman to have it audited. So we'll read this last part. How successful has the Federal Reserve System been? It depends on your point of view. Since Woodrow Wilson took his oath of office, the national debt has risen from 1 billion to 455 billion. And of course, we'll talk about what it is today.
yeah. Yeah.
The total amount of interest paid since then to the international bankers holding that debt is staggering, with interest having become the third largest item in the federal budget. Interest on the national debt is now 22 billion every year. Wow. And climbing steeply as inflation pushes up the interest rate on government bonds. Our national debt right now is 38.9 trillion in
Yep.
2026. And that
Mm-hmm.
is an 8,450% increase.
Oh. Well.
8,450. Yeah.
Oh.
So
Geez.
read this last little part here. Um,
Okay.
let's see. Climbing steeply as inflation pushes up the interest rate on government bonds. Meanwhile, our gold is mortgaged to European central banks, and our silver has all been sold. With economic catastrophe imminent, only a blind disciple of the accidental theory of history could believe that all of this has occurred by coincidence. Well, and to me, and I was just like, wow, 8,450%.
Ay, ay, ay.
But that's when they talked about in conference by small and simple things are great things brought to pass. And so,
Correct.
it's time for us to stop being like fence sitters and being like, well, I didn't want to get involved in politics. Yeah, they would like you to not and not know what
Yep.
they're doing. To 8,450%, right?
Wow.
That's crazy. And when you realize how they control the interest rates and all these different things, like I said, it's really sad how many people, family essential to the creator's plan, that says that in the proclamation to the family. And of course, like I said, if that's central to the Lord's plan, that's central to the adversary's plan of destruction. That if he can keep people from having families, getting married, and adulting, then he keeps spirits from coming to the earth, and he keeps people from having hope.
True.
So,
True.
anyways, I mean, you live in California, you know what it's like for the
Yeah.
expenses of things, and different parts
Oh
are
yeah.
probably a little bit better than others, but it hasn't accidentally gotten that way, which is really sad.
Correct. Hey, last time we were speaking, and I showed the Creature from Jekyll Island book. We talked about how there was the Tuttle Twins version of it.
Oh yeah.
And I said, I think I have a copy. Well, I just walked over to a bookshelf in the house.
Funny.
Let me uncover Connor's name there. So that's
Cool.
the front cover. We do have the book by Connor Boyack. So I'd flip through some of the pages, but I'm holding the phone in one hand and the book in another. But that is a thing, and I think it would be good for people to get it and go over with their kids, so they start learning young.
Yeah, that might be an easier version. Maybe you'll have to do a video of the Tuttle Twins version of Jekyll Island. That might be good.
Yeah, I was thinking that could be good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's because that's a simplified version without hard words, probably as many hard words.
Yeah.
So,
Correct.
anyways, well, thanks for joining me, Christian. I'm going to continue with the book, and then we will be together with you again next Friday.
Okay. Looking forward to covering chapter 4. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone. Okay.
All right. Good night,
Bye now.
Christian. We'll see ya. All right. So we'll continue. When the Federal Reserve System was foisted on an unsuspecting American public, there was absolute guarantees. Let's see. There was absolute guarantees that there would be no more boom and bust economic cycles. The men who, behind the scenes, were pushing the central bank concept for the international bankers faithfully promised that from then on there would be only steady growth and perpetual prosperity. However, Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr. accurately proclaimed, from now on, depressions will be scientifically created. And I would love to have comments of anybody as they listen to this later, especially in your little part of the world, because as we see how these people have been controlling everything through money and power and their influence. Using a central bank to create alternate periods of inflation and deflation, and thus whipsawing the public for vast profits, have been worked out by the international bankers to an exact science. Having built the Federal Reserve as a tool to consolidate and control wealth, the international bankers were now ready to make a major killing. Between 1923 and 1929, the Federal Reserve expanded, inflated the money supply by 62%. Wow, that's a lot. 62%, more than half. Much of this new money was used to bid the stock market up to dizzying heights. At the same time, that enormous amounts of credit money were being made available, the mass media began to ballyhoo tales of the instant riches to be made in the stock market, according to Ferdinand Lundberg. For profits to be made on these funds, the public had to be induced to speculate, and it was so induced by misleading newspaper accounts, many of them bought and paid for by the brokers that operated the pools. The House hearings on stabilization of the purchasing power of the dollar disclosed evidence in 1928 that the Federal Reserve Board was working closely with the heads of European central banks. That committee warned that a major crash had been planned in 1927 at a secret luncheon of the Federal Reserve Board and heads of the European central banks. The committee warned the international bankers were tightening the noose. Montague Norman, governor of the Bank of England, came to Washington on February 6, 1929, to confer with Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury. On November 11, 1927, the Wall Street Journal described Mr. Norman as the currency dictator of Europe. It's got a little bit more to go, a couple more pages. Professor Carol Quigley notes that Norman, a close confidant of J.P. Morgan, admitted, "I hold the hegemony of the world." Immediately after this mysterious visit, the Federal Reserve Board reversed its easy money policy and began raising the discount rate. The balloon, which had been inflated constantly for nearly 7 years, was about to be exploded. On October 24th, the feathers hit the fan, writing the United States unresolved monetary and political problems. William Bryan describes what happened. When everything was ready, the New York financiers started calling 24-hour broker call loans. This meant that the stockbrokers and the customers had to dump their stock on the market in order to pay the loans. This naturally collapsed the stock market and brought a banking collapse all over the country because the banks, not owned by the oligarchy, were heavily involved in broker call claims at this time. And bank runs soon exhausted their coin and currency, and they had to close. The Federal Reserve System would not come to their aid, although they were instructed under the law to maintain an elastic currency. The investigating public, including most stockbrokers and bankers, took a horrendous blow in the crash, but not the insiders. They were either out of the market or had sold short, so that they made enormous profits as the Dow Jones plummeted. For those who knew the score, a comment by Paul Warburg had provided the warning to sell. That sign came on March 9th, 1929, when the Financial Chronicle quoted Warburg as giving this sound advice. If unrestricted speculations are permitted to spread too far, the ultimate collapse is certain to bring about a general depression involving the whole country. And of course, we saw that during the pandemic and all over the world. Depressions of people losing jobs, losing homes. Congressman Louis McFadden, chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee, commented, "If the depression was not accidental, it was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair where so that they might emerge as the rulers of us all. Although we have not had another depression of the magnitude of that which followed 1929, we have since suffered regular recessions. Each of these has followed a period in which the Federal Reserve tromped down on the money accelerator and then slammed on the brakes. Since 1929, the following recessions have been created by such manipulation. 36 to 37, these are all the 1900s. Stock prices fell 50%. 48, so 1948, stock prices dropped 16%. 53, declined 13%. 56 to 57, market dipped 13%. 57, late in the year, the market plunged 19%. 60, the market was off 17%. 66, stock prices plummeted 25%. 70, the market plunged over 25%. So it looks like for them, it's like every 6 years or 3 to 6 years, they drop it. So chart 5, based on the appearing of the highly respected financial publication Indicator Digest of June 24th, 1969, shows the effects on the Dow Jones Industrial Average of Federal Reserve policies of expanding or restricting the monetary supply. You won't really be able to see it very well. This is how the stock market is manipulated and how depressions or recessions are scientifically created. If you have inside knowledge as to which way the Federal Reserve policy is going to go, you can make a ton of money. The members of the Federal Reserve Board are appointed by the president for the 14-year terms. Since these positions control the entire economy of the country, they are far more important than cabinet positions. But who has ever heard of any of them except possibly Chairman Arthur Burns? These appointments, which should be extensively debated by the Senate, are routinely approved. But here, as in Europe, these men are mere figureheads, put in their positions at the behest of the international bankers who finance the presidential campaigns of both political parties. And Professor Quigley reveals that these international bankers who owned and controlled the banks of England and France maintained their power even after those banks were theoretically socialized. The American system is slightly different, but the net effect is the same: ever increasing debt requiring ever increasing interest payments, inflation, and periodic scientifically created depressions and recessions. The end result, if the insiders have their way, will be the dream of Montague Norman of the Bank of England that the hegemony of world finance should reign supreme over everyone, everywhere, as one who supernational control mechanism. So these are the charts that they have, but probably going to be a little bit too hard and too small to read. But anyways, I know that right now it's really hard. There's a lot of people that are struggling, and when you look through for me, I know when I look through my feed on like YouTube, I see all these different, you know, attacks and things going on, shootings happening, and the U.S., there's dictators being taken out and terrorists being taken out. But it's important for us to know that God is in control. He sees and knows us and hears us, cares for us. And I'm grateful for this opportunity that I had to speak with you. And please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And hopefully I will see you in our next video. And chapter 4, what that is going to be about is bankrolling the Bolshevik Revolution. And the thing is, as we come and see the things that are going on, it helps us to understand how the Lord, He even has to use these disasters to help people to have their experiences in life that they need to develop a personal relationship when we rely on the Lord and are equally yoked with Him. So, well, have a good night, and we'll see you later. From Melissa, good night.